Everything looks good. All right. This is an unscripted video. Today we will see how AI agents work and we will build one ourselves, going from the basics of how to prompt it to system integration with CustomGPT and Airtable, and then ultimately how we expand these use cases to different systems. This is unscripted. Stay tuned. So before we dive into how to properly set these agents up, I will do an experiment with you, and this is completely unscripted. We will take ChatGPT and try to prompt it into being an AI agent, okay? So that you can see that there is no magic behind it. Actually, it is just an LLM, so a large language model, that just outputs commands as I prompt it and ask questions about my data and the systems that I will integrate it with, okay? So this is just plain ChatGPT 4.0, the standard model. So let's start prompting it, okay? Your role. So here we will prompt it first with, you're an API specialist who can design your task. By the way, I will instruct it in subsequent prompts so that it can output the stuff so that I won't need to input all the specification. And remember, this is just a toy example. We will dive into how this connects to other systems in short. You will design an API for a barbershop booking system. You will come up with an easily readable API output format. Here, I don't want it to be super technical because this is a toy example. I just want to show you that the LLM is able to decide when to call the API and when not, okay? So I will say, your output will be in pseudocode. So pseudocode is a type of programming language, well, more of a specification, let's say, but it can be quite specific for programming languages. But in this case, we will take its output for an API specification, okay? So here now we can see ChatGPT writing this API in pseudocode, okay? Which is pretty nice because it offers us as humans an easy way to read what it does. And later on we will use a standard specification called OpenAPI, which we will need when we will build the actual assistant, okay? So let's have a look. We will choose answer in chat instead because we want this to be inside the prompt. Again, this is a toy example. I could have written this by hand, but now I will show you just on a high level that there's no magic behind it. Okay, now it's done and I continue your new role. So now I want it to act as an AI agent. You're an AI agent that's connected to the Barber Shops API via the specification. You will wait for my questions and my commands. The way we'll continue this conversation is by me asking you a question or giving you a request and you answering briefly and to the point. You'll use easy to read short sentences. Also, here in the task specification, I forgot to mention every time you are asked about appointments and the booking system. Now at the output format we say, in the case when you will output an API call, you will do this in the standard format that you've specified in the specification above. Once I've provided you with the answer, you'll complete my query or question based on that answer. Let's start. All right, so now this is a basic instruction for this system, okay? This is by no means a complete AI agent system prompt, okay? These prompts, they can go pages and pages, and depending on how complex the system is, the API specification up here can be even more complex, right? But just for the sake of this unscripted test, we will just assume that this is an API that we want to roll with. All right, so let's see, understood, ready to manage your barbershop's booking. Just let me know what you need. All right, so let's go. Hey, it's Robert. I want to get my hair cut. Can you guide me through booking an appointment? Okay, so here it says, sure, Robert, let's book your haircut first. I need to check which barbers are available. So then it understands here that we want to get an API call, okay? So again, I just programmed this agent very, very simply, okay? And at this point, I feel like here, I need to split this in 2 steps. So one step is the text that it will output to me as the user, and the other one would be the step where it actually calls the API. So we will quickly go back to the system prompt here, and we will just make sure here that in the output format, we specify this a bit more precisely, okay? So in the case when you will output an API call, okay, so we say there are 2 main cases. So we say 1, you output an answer to the, okay, so actually once we will use the proper AI agent through a CustomGPT, this will already be done in the background, okay? So this is already handled by the OpenAI developers, where they make sure that the user output will be output to the user and the system call goes back to the API. But here we just split them because we want to make sure that this little simulation works well. So in the case where you'll output an answer to the user, you will say the answer will be, and then you will output an API call, and we will say the API call, good. And now we will say you will never mix up API calls with user messages. You will always ask either one or the other and wait for my answer. Okay, let's go back, replay this prompt, and again go ahead what we like me to do. So, hi, I'm Robert, I'd like to book an appointment for getting my hair cut. Can you walk me through the booking process? Okay, so here we see that it adhered to the output format, okay? So if this were a backend service, of course we would have a slightly more technical format, like in JSON. I mean, I won't get into this here right now, but here already in the backend we can split the 2 paths, and if it says user message, I will display this to the user, and later on when it will do an API call, I will send this API call directly to the API. So in this case, do you have a preferred barber? When would you like to book your appointment? Let me know. Okay, so let's say which barbers are available for the next week. Let's first have a look at the API specification to just make sure that we have all the endpoints that we need. So we have customer endpoints to create a customer, read customer, update, delete. That's fine. Barbers, create a barber, read barber, update, delete. So let's see in the case of barbers. Okay, the availability. Okay, that's fine. The availability is okay. Looks good. Okay, then we can send out this prompt. And here we have it. So once it understood that now it's about an API call, it sends this API call directly. Okay, so in this case, since it's a small simulation, I will provide an API response to this. Okay, so now to make it a bit quicker, okay, I will cheat a little bit in the sense that I won't respond with the whole list of barbers. Okay, because here we see that the read barber endpoint has an ID, name. Right, so get barbers, create, read, update, delete. Yeah, usually the get barbers ID will give you an array of barbers, so it would need an ID, name, specialization, and so on. Okay, so here I will cheat just a little bit, and I will generate a list of barbers that I will then send to the API. So here I will just open this sidebar called Monica, which is a different LLM and an assistant right baked into a browser extension. And here I will just say, you're an API call specialist, or let's say you're an API backend that accesses Barbers. This is the specific. Your task, you'll generate a list of Barbers. So here's a sample list. So I will just use this list now in the answer to ChatGPT. Okay. Okay, looks good. So copy. So here again, API call paste. Okay, so I did this exercise with this little sidebar just to save me the time to complete this list of Barbers. Okay, so now let's see what happens. I'm just going to close this sidebar. So now we see that the system got this information, which you can imagine will happen in the background with a real assistant. And here it returned a list of the barbers that I have just specified. Okay, so now it says, okay, these are the available barbers. Do you have a preferred barber and day in mind? And I'd say, let's go with Sophia's. Let's go with Sophia. I'd like to book her for next Thursday. And now we see again, it understood that now it needs to do an API call. So you see, this is this beautiful interplay between talking to me, talking to the API, getting the data from the API, and then basically solving my problem for me, okay? Accessing the booking system. So now here, it says, okay, API call post. So it would, post means create a new appointment. So it will create a customer ID, a Barber ID, Barber ID 2, which is fine. We have it here. Service ID, date and time. Of course, some of the fields they are missing because my specification wasn't complete, okay? I should have also prompted it in the system prompt to say, okay, you will ask me for my name and you will do this and that, okay? So this is not a complete specification, okay? Because as I said, it can be pretty long. But in this case, we saw a very small example that it booked me in for next week on Thursday, which is the 9th, and it has the status scheduled. Okay, then I can ask, are we okay? And it says, okay, your appointment with Sophia has been scheduled for Thursday at 10. Let me know if you need anything else. Let's say later on I want to change the time. Then I say, please change the time of the appointment with Sophia from 10 a.m. to 15:35. It changed it with a put request, which means it changes this appointment to this date. Status scheduled, all good. Anything else needed from my side? All right, looks good. So here we saw a very simple example, okay? And you see that making AI agents is no magic, okay? So these are very simple, and I say very simple because, I mean, they're plain LLMs, using them in a proper way, prompting them in a proper way. And now we will see an actual example of LLMs and plugging CustomGPTs into an API. So welcome to today's tutorial where we will show you how to create simple AI agents, right? So what we will do in today's example is we will show you 3 steps. We will take a CustomGPT and creating a API connection to a database. So we have 3 simple steps here. And as a database, we choose Airtable as an example, but this can be expanded to any system with an API, just as we saw earlier in the mini example. So how are we getting there? As I showed you earlier, this is the workflow that we will be doing. So as we saw previously, this is the AI agent chat that we will have. And here we have the system prompt, which was that part that I inserted in the beginning where I say you're a smart assistant that follows me around and so and so. And in this example, we will use a conference scheduling tool. It's more like saving contacts that I met at conferences. Okay, you might know this situation. You're in a meetup or conferences, you meet lots of people and you want to follow up with them the next day, but it's super cumbersome to type it all in your phone right after you talk to them. So why don't we just create a CustomGPT that we can use on our phone with the OpenAI app, where you just speak into it and then it will create these contacts right in your Airtable with the data that you mentioned. And then what I want to show with this diagram is that then as a user I say, hey, I just met Sarah Wilson at this conference, add her to the database. Okay, so then what happens is again this interplay between the background API call and the system that, and the message that the system writes back to me. So in this sense, once the system detects that I want to save data into the database, it will call this write API endpoint. So here we have an API that is simplified. So it's the thing that we had earlier in the chat, so I will quickly go back. So it's this specification here, okay? But for the sake of simplicity, I've just used a simplified version of it. So usually we want to write, read, get contacts, update contacts, and delete contacts. So in our easy example right now, in our trivial example, we just had the LLM output these messages to us. But what a CustomGPT will do, which has more logic in the background and is designed to call APIs in real, it will use this as an API call to the database. So it won't output write this contact as it did here. For example, post API appointments, okay? It won't output it to us, but it will directly write it into the database, okay? So this is the simple workflow that will happen with the CustomGPT and with any agent for that matter, no matter if it's built with a no-code platform or built in code or built via CustomGPTs. All right, so this is the simple workflow that we will follow today, and where we will see how we can write data directly from our ChatGPT chat window into Airtable. So the first step we will do is to set up Airtable, where we will first create a table that will contain the data of our contacts. Then we will generate an API key for Airtable's API so that just we have access to it, right, due to security reasons. And then ultimately we will get Airtable's API specification. So to quickly go back to the chat we had earlier, this is the API specification. But as I said, it is very simple. We will use a standardized format called OpenAPI. And we will see how we can generate this also with the help of ChatGPT. So it might sound super complex, but let me guide you through it step by step, and it's very easy. Let's get to it. So we will go to Airtable. So I've already prepared a table for this demo called AI Assistant Contacts Base. So here I've already created the columns of the table. It's called name, company, role, date met, known from, currently working on, recent problem, hobbies, and next steps, and other details, LinkedIn intro message. So these are usually the details that I want to know about somebody whom I have met at a conference. I want to know what they're interested in, when I met them, at which conference, and so on. Just to give you a little example of how this can look like. So let's say this is Sarah Smith, company OpenAI. Next steps, let's say we said we'll follow up. Cheers, Rob. All right, here we go. We want the CustomGPT to take the data that we input into it, which will be part of the conversation that we had with this person, extract these details in the CustomGPT, and then fill it into Airtable. So here we need Airtable's backend API. So first we need our API key, okay? We will write this down because we will need it later when we access it out of the CustomGPT. We get the API key from our profile. We click on our profile image, we click on account, and here we go to API, click Go to Developer Hub, create token, and then we create new token by clicking here. So we click a name and say CustomGPT integration. And the scope, so here we can specify what we can do with this API key. So usually we want everything. We want to read, write, and delete stuff in the database. Create token. Okay, perfect. So your token has been created. So now we copy this token and we will just write it down in a safe place for the moment. Don't share it with anyone. Okay, perfect. So once the token has been displayed, it won't be displayed again due to security reasons. I can only change its rights. Once this is done, we need the API specification of Airtable because we need to introduce this into the CustomGPT so that it knows what endpoints it can access, right? For this, I will just Google Airtable. Here we have Airtable Web API. This is what we need. So here we have the entire API specification that we have here. List records, get records, update multiple records, and so on. So this is what we need. And we need to generate something that is called OpenAPI specification. So we will do this in a smart way. ChatGPT and the ChatGPT CustomGPT interface has a way to generate this. So we'll go back and create a CustomGPT now. By the way, you can find this complete documentation in the document inside the description. And there you can find a full presentation, including this document that has all the diagrams and the walkthroughs. You will have links to the Airtable base that I presented here that you can have a look at, and to the CustomGPT that I will publish at the end of this tutorial. And you will have access to the complete prompts, both the system prompts and the Airtable API specification, to try it out yourself and see how it works so that you can recreate the whole CustomGPT that I showed in this tutorial. It's the link in the description below. Now, how do we create a CustomGPT? We have 3 steps here. We access the GPT builder inside the OpenAI's ChatGPT interface. Then we have to prompt it with a system prompt where we specify the behavior and its goals. And then ultimately we have to configure its settings. So we need to put the API of Airtable into its specification via the actions. Let's have a look how this works. We go to ChatGPT, we click on Explore GPTs, and here at the top we click Create. We click Configure, and here we give it a name. We say Airtable, we give it a short description, and now come the instructions. So I've prepared these instructions up front. You have access to them in the document in the description, as I said, so let's go through them. Your role, you're a smart assistant that follows me around conferences. You listen to every conversation. I have to take notes. You know everything I talked about with new contacts, and so on. LinkedIn intro message. So here we specify how the intro message will look like, that it will insert into the Airtable in a bit. And then also the conversation output format, name, company, role, and so on. Your capabilities. You're connected to the Airtable API. You'll work with the conference contacts base ID. Base ID this. So this is not correct because it's from a different GPT. So our current name is AI Assistant Contacts Base. AI Assistant Contacts Base. And now comes the important part. Now we have this thing called actions. This is where we specify the API specification. Okay, so now we need to use a real format, which is called OpenAPI. So we can copy everything that we have in here into this little helper that's called Get Help from Actions GPT, and let it generate an OpenAPI specifications for us. So, for example, let's go to list records and copy this entire page. Paste it in here. And now it will output an OpenAPI specification for this endpoint. So we see it helps us a lot, and it avoids errors that we might make along the way. Now, as you see, this is only for one operation, namely list records. Okay, we then have a few more like get record, update multiple records, update record, and so on. So ideally we would copy paste each one of these pages into the actions builder and get this OpenAPI schema. So I already did this work and I generated a complete OpenAPI schema for Airtable. This is pretty long. You can find it in the document in the description. Once you pasted it in here, you will see that OpenAI automatically extracts the available actions. So basically this is what the CustomGPT will have access to. Get base schema, list bases, list records, and so on. All right. Now the last part that we need is to copy the API key into the authentication part. We do this by clicking on Authentication and choose API key. Here we copy the key that we generated earlier and we click on Barber. This is just the way the authentication works. Once this is done, we can test the integration here. And we can say, what are the tables inside? So now we can see that it asks me if I want to make a call to the Airtable integration test table. All right. And here this is for security reasons, because sometimes you might modify data and it's something you don't want to have mistakes in because it is some sensitive data. So in this case, we click always allow. So now it says starting action. And here, if we click this arrow, and the ones before it, we can see what the API has done in the background. So here we can see that it actually accessed the API address with this method, with this path, and so on. So I will quickly go back to the very easy example we had in the beginning with the barber shop, okay, just to make the comparison. So this is the naive example we had, get API barbers. But remember that I said that a real agent, and in this case the CustomGPT, will not output this to me, but it will call the action in the background. So this is what happened here. And I can watch it. It's called, it has a debug prefix, meaning in programmer's language, I can have a look at what actually happens under the hood in case there are any mistakes, so I can follow the whole path of actions that it has done. Okay, so I see, okay, that's good. It called this meta basis endpoint that I can see over here, okay, meta basis, operation list basis, which is this one, which is fine, and so on. So this is the response that I get when I actually call this API. So this is the name we have, AI Assistance Contact Base, right, is the correct one, and then it shows me its ID. This is very good. So now I can ask it for the given are the tables inside. And we can see it output the correct details. So this base contains the following table, name, company, role, and so on. And it's correct because these are the columns that we have specified earlier. All right. So now there is one more thing that I need to do. Remember that back in the system prompt, I had deleted a few parts that specified the IDs of the table and the IDs of the columns. I have to refill this part with the IDs of the table that I just created. And why do I need this? Well, right now, if I have a look at this chat window, we already have the IDs of the important parts of Airtable inside the context. So now if I were to add something like add a new contact named John Doe of company Meta Inc. with hobbies such as cooking into the table. Okay, so if I do this now, it works seamlessly. Again, it asks me, do I want to do this? Yes. A new contact has been added, so we can test if this was successful. We just have a look at the Airtable table. And here we have the contact that was just introduced, okay? Now, the thing is, this worked because in the background, when we look at the API call, it used this base ID because this is needed in the API specification, right? If we go back to the specification, there is an endpoint that's called create records. So it needs the base ID and the table ID. We can see it here. So this is basically the base ID. It worked because this base ID is in the context. So now let's just save this as is temporarily. I click create. I publish it only for me. So the problem now is that if I start a new chat with this CustomGPT and I ask it, what are the contacts that I have in my table? We expect it to list all the 3 contacts that we already have. So what it does actually here, it throws an error. Why is this happening? It says it seems there was an issue accessing it due to invalid permissions and so on, or an incorrect table reference. So then it somehow is smart enough to figure out what the base ID is. So the second time it uses this base ID. So the problem here is that it doesn't have a table reference right at the beginning, okay? Now in this case, we got lucky because the CustomGPT was smart enough to retry and first probably in the background list all the tables, but we don't want to rely on this. The more exact, the better. So what we need to do now is to find the IDs of these tables and of the base so that it never fails. So now we go back to the CustomGPT, we edit it, and this is where we have to refill in those parts that we deleted earlier because I took them from a different CustomGPT, so right here. So what I will do here now is I will say the following. List the IDs of the bases. And then I will say for this base, list the IDs of the columns. And now I will say output all this data in JSON format. This is the format that we will use for the system prompt, which is the easiest to understand for ChatGPT. So once we specify this inside the system prompt, the CustomGPT will know the IDs and won't make this mistake again of using an invalid reference. So we click copy code, we go back to the instructions, and here we say the bases, and then we say JSON because this is JSON format. So we input the code as is, and then we copy the base ID, which is this, and we specify it here in the instruction. You will use the base with ID. We go back and see if this error occurs again. We start a new chat and ask it, what contacts do I have in my database? So now it was successful in doing so, and we see that it used this base ID, the one we specified in the system prompt. So now the system is more or less bulletproof because no matter what we throw at it right now, it will fill data into the database. So let's try out some experiments. If you want to learn how to build your own CustomGPT and your own custom AI agent, join the Make Work Obsolete community. There we will teach you how to build your first AI automation without breaking the bank. We host a full course curriculum that takes you from zero to AI proficiency. We have weekly Q&A calls where you can ask your questions and get them answered by real AI tech experts. And we have a community chat with everyone else inside, where you can find business owners or operators like yourself who want to build their first AI automation without breaking the bank. We offer a 7-day free trial, Make sure you click the link in the description below and I'll see you inside. So what did we do so far with the CustomGPT? We connected it via the OpenAPI specification. We did this by using the little helper in the CustomGPT creator, and then we reviewed and refined it, so we made sure that the actual correct endpoints are being accessed via the correct IDs. And now what we will do is to test some queries and bringing it live so we make sure that we can use this in production. You can then share this link with your other team members. To make it easier for us, we will have the chat come up with the profile of a person just to save us some time. Come up with the profile and details of a person to add to our database. So now it came up with a profile nicely with bullet points, and I will say don't add it yet, use natural language instead of a bullet list to simulate a real conversation with this contact. So in this case, we can see that we can feed it natural language and it will actually do the thing. So now it said, would you like me to extract the details? So this looks more like a natural language conversation, and I say yes, proceed. So now it extracts the data from it, and it will ask me, do I want to add this contact to the database? It also extracted a nice LinkedIn intro message that adhered to the format that I specified in the system prompt, which usually resembles the way I'd like to do LinkedIn outreach, like, hey Alex, it was great to meet you at Neuro IPS 2025, discussing and so and so. Would you like to add me? Yes, please add the contact to the database. So now what it does, again it starts the action. I have to confirm again. Now it says that this person has been successfully added. Let me know if you need anything else. Again, let's see if it was successful indeed. Here we see the new contact, Alex Johnson, everything as specified. Very nice, and with a LinkedIn intro message right here, which I can copy and paste right into my LinkedIn outreach. How beautiful is that? Now, let's say something has changed and I want to add a different note to a contact. So let's say I have Jane Doe, and let's say I want to update the recent problem she's working on. So I go back to the CustomGPT and say, let's have a look at Jane Doe. Can you update this inside the database? Now you might ask yourself, isn't it too complex to just write this prompt? And wouldn't it be easier to just go to the database and just write this information by hand? Well, yes, but imagine that writing is not the final frontier. If you open up ChatGPT in your phone app, you can actually use it with your voice. So this is where the real power lies. So I will just talk to my phone and say, update the details of Jane Doe in this and this way. So here there's a little problem that it cannot find, apparently it cannot probably find Jane Doe's ID. Let's see. What's the exact error? So as you see, these systems are not completely fail-safe. And in this case, it says that there's a problem with the fields parameter. So again, the better you prompt it, the more fail-safe it becomes. What's the ID of this parameter? So now that I told it to extract the parameter, it retries it. Maybe it didn't find the ID of Jane. What's the ID of Jane? Continue. So the second problem was that it didn't find a record of Jane Doe. So in this sense, it makes it easier if you first ask it for the ID. So let's try it again. So we see Jane Doe. The problem she's currently working on has been updated, focusing on how to fine-tune LLMs in a user-friendly way. which is very nice. The point here is that, again, this is a system like any other, and the more specific you are, the better. So now let's say I want to update John Doe's role in the company. And I will provide a more comprehensive prompt. I'll say, I want to update John Doe's role. So in this case, it will call the API to get John Doe's ID and then use this ID in the update request to update his role in the company. This is also a small example of how planning works. So I can give the agent a goal, and then the agent will figure out the steps respectively. I can give it the steps to make it fail-safe that it will follow step by step, and it will first gather the data and then execute the operation. And if we have a look, John Doe, backend engineer. So this works very smoothly. Again, you can specify this way of work directly inside the system prompt. So you can say in the system prompt, if we go back here to edit, we could in theory go to each one of these steps and we could add a new section called way of operation. Whenever I mention the name of a contact or a table, if you don't have the ID, query the API for it. Now that we've connected an API with a CustomGPT, which in this case was Airtable, we can extend this exercise to any system. Any system that has an API with a specification and an API key can be used here. So specifically, we can use a CRM as an integration, a project management tool, a financial analysis tool, so we can ask ChatGPT, take the data in this database and do certain calculations with it, or a customer support database, and so on. So the possibilities are endless here, and in each case, it's important to see how this integrates with your own workflows and systems. If you found this video useful, I appreciate it if you would like it and subscribe to the channel so you stay up to date with new videos that I put out. I'm trying to teach and bring the newest generative AI tools to businesses and make them more productive. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.